My first interest in this particular question about the accurate preservation of the Gospels started out when I was a student at Moody Bible Institute. At Moody Bible Institute, I believed, as did my professors, that the Bible is without error in the autographs. In other words, the originals of the New Testament did not have mistakes in them, even if subsequent copies of the New Testament may have mistakes in them. The problem is, we don't have the originals of the New Testament. What we have are thousands of copies of the New Testament that were made, in most cases, centuries later. We don't have the originals. We have copies made centuries later. These copies that were made centuries later contain numerous mistakes, thousands of mistakes, tens of thousands of mistakes, hundreds of thousands of mistakes. This was a problem for me at Moody Bible Institute, and I decided that I wanted to learn more about the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. I went to Princeton Theological Seminary to study with the foremost scholar in the field, Bruce Metzger. I devoted years of my life to this study. This has been the core of my research for the past 30 years. At some point, I came to the realization that my belief in the inerrancy of the autographs didn't make sense. If God inspired the Bible without error, why hadn't he preserved the Bible without error? I couldn't think of a good answer then, and I still can't think of a good answer now, even though I think I've heard every answer ever proposed. I couldn't any longer believe that God had inspired the originals because I was sure he had not preserved the original. Let me tell you now what I think about this entire situation, which is that we cannot know whether the Gospels have been preserved accurately through the ages, and I'm going to try and illustrate with you by explaining how it worked. Take the Gospel of Mark. Whenever Mark was written, say it was written in the year 65 or in the year 70, in the city of Rome, say, I don't know where it was made. Whoever wrote Mark put it in circulation, and somebody copied the Gospel of Mark. Then somebody copied that copy, and somebody copied the copy of the copy. Then somebody copied the copy of the copy of the copy of the copy. And we don't have any of those copies. Everybody who copied the text made mistakes. Our first surviving copy of Mark probably dates to around the year 220 A.D. That is, 150 years after Mark was first produced. Our first complete copy of Mark comes from the year 350, about 280 years after Mark. We have lots of copies from later times. From thousands of years, 1,000 years after Mark, we get lots of copies. When you compare all of these copies with one another, they all differ from one another.
Okay, when you see Bart Ehrman, you understand that he was once a fundamentalist preacher, and he gets into that preaching mode. His argument here is that the New Testament documents cannot be inerrant because we no longer have the original autographs. All we have are copies of copies of copies that are filled with thousands and thousands of mistakes. Now, this is extremely misleading, Nathan. The New Testament is the best attested book in ancient history, both in terms of the number of manuscripts and in terms of the nearness of those manuscripts to the date of the original. Textual scholars, by comparing these thousands of manuscripts with each other, are able to reconstruct the text of the original autographs to about 99% certainty. There are about 138,000 words in the New Testament, and only 1,400 of those words remain uncertain as to their reading. And those words are utter trivialities. They are things like in 1 John chapter 1, the author says, "We write this that our joy may be full." But some manuscripts say, "We write this that your joy may be full." Is it our or your? It doesn't matter. Nothing hangs upon that kind of trivial uncertainty. So only about 1% of the New Testament concerns words that are uncertain, and those are complete trivialities. And that's why when I learned Greek in college, I can pick up my Greek New Testament, and when I read it, I know that 99% of the words that I am reading are the original words penned by Luke or by Paul or by John. That's how well textual scholars have been able to reconstruct the original text. And Bart Ehrman knows this. He is a textual scholar. He knows this. And so his fellow New Testament scholars have differentiated between two Bart Ehrmans. There's scholarly Bart, who knows this, and then there's popular Bart, who deliberately misleads lay people by writing controversial and sensationalist books that are bestsellers. But he knows the difference between the two. This was very evident on a Lutheran radio program that I heard in 2008 when Ehrman was interviewed. And after describing all these copyist errors that we saw in the clip, the interviewer says to Ehrman, well, what do you think the New Testament originally said? And Ehrman said, I don't know what you mean. I don't understand you. And the interviewer said, well, what do you think these New Testament documents originally said? And Ehrman said, well, they said pretty much what the text says today. And the interviewer said, but you said there were all these copyist mistakes. And Ehrman says, yeah, but we've been able to reconstruct the text. So he knows this, but for the sake of sensationalism and honestly, or dishonestly, misleading unsuspecting and innocent lay people, you get this kind of misrepresentation.
Wow, and how important it is to listen to the scholars both on stage and in the written work.
Yeah.
That's what I'm taking away.